morning, stroke afternoon, everyone. My name is Haruna, and we have Safiya Yahaya here with us today, and we're going to be talking about urbanization, urban planning in Nigeria, and we're also going to be talking about affordable housing. But before we start, I'd like to get
Do you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah, a little background, like what you've done.
Okay, so I'm an architect, but I work a lot in planning. So basically what that entails is just like planning out districts, communities, transportation, and mainly just observing the way people live in their communities and trying to make it more efficient.
Okay.
And also increase the quality of life for them there, I guess.
So you studied architecture in university?
I studied architecture.
But then you ended up in...
But I ended up somewhere between architecture and planning.
So what inspired the transition?
Okay, so architecture is primarily very creative, which, I always felt like I did well there, but planning has the human factor involved. So there's more field work involved. You get to see people, talk to them, and then talk about how their communities shape their everyday lives. So I just find that more interesting. I actually started social work before I even decided I was going to be an architect.
Okay.
So like the social aspect of it has always been very strong for me. And I think what I'm doing now is just basically going back to where I came from. So figuring out how I can involve the built environment into the social work that I've always done.
Okay. So the other day we were talking about sustainability in terms of housing and stuff like that, and you said something like it's not realistic or something like that. What exactly did you mean by that? Like
it's not realistic?
Not you didn't say it's not realistic, but you're like you had some criticisms about the way sustainability in terms of housing is looked at.
Well, yes, because I think that the big trend right now is to market solar panels, wind energy, whatever it is you're doing as sustainable. But then when you look at what sustainability is really supposed to be, that all those things they're not sustainable enough. So sustainability should include everything from the way you design something to the end. So basically the whole life cycle of a building, for example. And there's so much that goes beyond solar panels. I mean, in terms of material, sustainability comes from the choice of material we make and how we basically utilize the waste that the building generates. How can you put that back? Just ensuring that throughout the life cycle of that building there's as little waste as possible and everything is used as efficiently as possible. And I don't think solar panels should be the hallmark of what sustainability is.
Like obviously solar panels, like in the way that Nigerians are trying to embrace it, is not very cost effective because it costs a lot to make and then it costs a relatively high amount to maintain as well, and then the amount of solar you need to generate the same power, the other like maybe traditional forms of power generation, is actually a lot. So I don't think people understand that, because when they hear solar they just solar, all you have to do is put the panel and then generate electricity, but all of those things.
It's not. But the good thing is that a lot of people are putting in real thought into sustainability now. So I was recently at a project last week, and what they're doing is they're building out of mud bricks. And mud bricks, they're really picking up now, surprisingly. They're really big. It's cheap.
Is it the house I saw you posted?
It's durable. That's one of them, but not that one. But mud bricks are really big now. The house that I went to last week is also a good example of how to reuse waste and basically build something out of it.
But because they use plastics.
Use plastic.
What about the one, the health implications, and two, fire, in terms of fire and stuff like that?
So it's not. I mean, nobody's going to come and tell you that this is safe, that we're going to be building houses in the city primarily out of recycled plastic bottles, but it's a good way to do small scale projects. So on a very small scale, there is no real danger that can come with it. And I mean, ultimately, what is going to happen to the plastic? It stays there forever. So it's a way to kind of take the waste off the streets. And I get that, but I think that with like what you said about building low-income housing or social housing, the problem has always been that we've always practiced outdated planning methods that just don't work. And there's like tried and tested examples of these social housing schemes that just do not work. Like I mean, you can talk about, in England there's so many examples. You know, there's so many districts that are just known for being poor because people decided that, okay, so this is social housing and this is for low income users, and we'll house them all in the same place. Like that does not work, and that's how you start to get ghettos and slums, because those areas are so poor, so neglected. They grow and they grow and they grow. And then
they get gentrified afterwards.
And then those people get displaced and kicked out, which is ridiculous. So, you know, a big thing in planning right now is to kind of embed social housing within the wider context of, you know, the city. So it's not that you just have one area that is just low income, but you spread it out. And then you find that with those examples, it's harder to get clusters of ghettos. Like it's harder to get places that are not taken care of. Because if you're lower income and then maybe your neighbor two doors down the street is middle class, there is a general, it evens out the responsibility of the district, and then you find that, you know, it doesn't become this neglected area.
I think indirectly in some parts of Nigeria, without us even knowing, that happens. Like especially in places like Kaduna, you find that there's a very high income, very well planned house, and then beside it there's a very
but that happens because there's no regulation, obviously, and sometimes you have illegal squatters who just
I mean, like it's actually not squatters, but like the income level is like, maybe let's say, or maybe why or how that happens is maybe you bought land in like 20 years ago. That same person bought land when it was cheap, and obviously your life in terms of income, like
two different directions.
And then that person, this is the type of like low income house
that they can afford to build,
and then the other person. So that happens indirectly still. But again, because like you said, there's no regulation, and it still doesn't.
The example of Kaduna, I mean, you see it all over, everywhere. I mean, basically in cities that are not planned, like these places have been allowed to grow organically. So you can have those kind of things, and those things are good. Organic growth is, I mean,
too much of it is
not good. You don't want too much, but then there's a few things that we get right when we allow cities to grow organically. So, I mean, that example is a good one. But then when you have planned cities, like the one we're in now, like Abuja, that's when you start to have
Can you plan organic?
You can plan to a certain extent. So there's this thing where you plan districts. So you say this area primarily will be mixed use. So it will be commercial and housing. But you won't exactly dictate what the price of the plot is. So you allow different people from different, you know, places to come in and then own a piece of that district.
I think if you talk about Abuja, like a place like Warimpa, I know before, like it was a bit, there was some structure and plan to it in terms of places that were strictly residential.
There was,
And now there's no, like, some people, like, there's house, shop, house, market opposite the house.
Market opposite the house.
And
buildings that are clearly supposed to be residential being turned into commercial buildings or school buildings. And then because you're changing the function of essentially the street. Because if you have enough commercial buildings in one street, it becomes a commercial street. And so because you've changed that into a commercial street, that area wasn't planned for that, so you don't have enough parking. And if there's ever any emergency or a fire in that place, I mean, it's going to be a disaster. So, I mean, regulation, all these things are in place, but nobody is there to regulate them.
It boils down to regulation, I guess. So, like with that, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was planned, like housing in what's the word to use, affordable housing. And Nigeria, we have about almost 180 million people. It's probably more.
I think it's more than.
It's probably
I know.
more.
I think
Officially,
it's more than.
and the census we use is like 2006 or something like that. It's very old.
2007.
It's very old, and that was like around 107
It's
something.
definitely more than that.
I know we might be clocking around 200,
Yeah.
maybe more. Who knows? Because all these they're like very rural areas of Nigeria that probably we don't.
I also think that there's a lot of areas that are not counted.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah. So
and that goes along with everything.
yeah.
Even with housing statistics, I think there's so much that is not being accounted for and it's not counted.
Yeah. But I think the problem in Nigeria is quite complex because apart from the fact that our statistics are a bit skewed, that's one. I think there's there's not enough. I think that we might have a overpopulation issue in Nigeria, maybe. But again, that is very controversial because when you talk
I'm very careful to say overpopulation because what are you supposed to do with the people that don't fit?
You don't have to do anything to those people that don't fit, but you have to call it a spade a spade. It affects how our place develops. But the problem is, even though there might be an overpopulation issue, there's still a lot of houses that are empty, especially in this Abuja.
Yes.
So the politics comes into play. A lot of things come into play. The fact that we have a lot of people that don't have houses because we might be overpopulated in an area, but then they don't have houses. But then there's also a lot of empty houses. So many different problems from all angles.
Yes.
So how do we solve that?
I'm not sure I know how to solve that, but I can give my thoughts. So I think, affordable housing is the biggest problem because it's not that Abuja doesn't even have affordable housing. There are places that are affordable
outside Abuja,
and that's the biggest problem. Like every single place that you're going to work in or trade or do business or have meetings, it's all in basically the FCT region.
Yeah.
Which is the city center.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not feasible for you to now say, okay, we're going to have affordable housing for Abuja, but then the housing is not in Abuja. So then what are you doing? So that's why we have those houses that are outside Abuja, some of them like an hour away, and they're all sitting there empty. And a lot of people can afford them, but then nobody wants to live there because it's not close to anything. So I think mixed use development is the best way to kind of get through that. Just not designating one particular place to say, okay, this is where we're going to work, and then this is where we're going to live. And so when we get up in the morning, we're all going to move from place A to place B. It shouldn't be like that. I think you should have multiple places where there is both live and work. So when it's time to move around, you're not stuck in traffic for 2-3 hours if you live outside of town everyone trying to get to one place at the same time.
I think with that, maybe improving transport helps as well, because let's say you live 30 minutes to an hour outside. You live in the outskirts of Abuja and you walk inside. If there's a good transport system that will cut down your travel time, you wouldn't mind as much, because some people commute from, let's say, Southampton to Bournemouth in the UK. It's like 45 minutes to an hour because the transport system is good. There's a train, you can live in Bournemouth and wake up every day.
It's public transport.
Yeah. So if you fix transport, you might be able to solve that issue.
If you fix transport, you can solve a lot of the housing issues, because people would not mind then living further and further away from that specific axis. Yeah. But then, in general, too, I think there just needs to be more mixed-use places that are affordable.
So how do you go about doing affordable housing? For example, is it supposed to be a public-private partnership, strictly public, strictly private, anyone?
Well, it's primarily public. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's primarily public.
How do they recoup their investment?
I think that there's so many examples of people giving private organization incentives to build public housing. So I know that with lots of large scale developers who are trying to build, commercial, one of the things that a regulation could say, for instance, is that, okay, so if you're going to build, thousands and thousands of square meters of this commercial thing, you have to build a park right next to it. And then, or you have to do some kind of housing for the staff that is going to work there.
Yeah.
So there's incentives like that, the public sphere can give them to allow them to come in and to gradually change, that urban narrative that we currently have.
Yeah. Because I always think about it like sometimes when I go out, maybe let's say you go out around 8, 9 at night, and you go to like a restaurant or you go to the cinema or something like that, and the people that are serving you there, they probably live maybe 1-2 hours outside, so maybe they close around 10, 11, and that's when they have to start heading back. And by then, like most of the cabs, there are not as many cabs. There's definitely no bus.
It's dark. It's dangerous.
Yeah. And then they have to wake up very early the next day
and start heading back.
So, because there's no affordable housing within like a reasonable radius of where they work, and also because the transport system is quite bad and all of those things, then it feeds into security issue, because now these workers are not very safe, and then it creates avenue for all sorts of dangerous people to capitalize off of that. So from where do we start from to solve this? Because again, is this whole question of chicken or egg?
It is.
So which one was it? What is the problem? Where do you start from? Because if we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about housing, then transport comes in, then safety and security. So which one is first?
I mean, it is a chicken and an egg thing. Like everything works together.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you can't say you're going to have, you're going to provide affordable housing, but then at the same time, it has to affect the transport in some way.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So it's all about getting, to that balanced place of having both of them working together.
In Abuja, since Abuja is a planned city, it's planned.
It is planned.
And to a certain degree,
in fact,
to a reasonable degree,
yeah,
the plan has been followed.
It has been followed. Okay, go on.
So in this case, I think it will be easier to kind of make adjustments in places like Kaduna, Katuna, all those places. How?
No, I'm just like, I don't know.
Because you have a place like Kadori, Chiku local government. That is where we do most of the IAED work and stuff. Yeah. So you see how that place is. Like on the flip side, on one of the sides, you can kind of see that I think somewhere along the line, someone was like, this place would be good to do planned development and stuff like that. So some parts, very relatively small parts, there's some development, there's some structure, but then for the most part it's there's no structure at all. And that place is basically called New Kaduna, and that place had the potential to be planned and done very well, with proper structure. They didn't get electricity till maybe earlier this year, and then when you go to the really ghetto side of Kadori, you see one house that starts from here and the neighbor's fence starts from here, and then there's no sewage at all. There are no gutters. You see someone, this is the road and this is someone's house, and there's no sewage. The foundation is probably
so bad. The gutters are just flowing.
The road is the gutter, and
that's awful.
The road is the entrance to the house, and the gutter is and then there's a house here, and the gate is here, and there's a tree here.
I mean, for someone like me, going into those kind of places is literally a nightmare, because the first thing I always see is fire hazard.
Yeah.
I'm just walking around, I'm like, that's a fire hazard. It's just there's lots of safety concerns, like with what you just explained, with the gates being so close and emergency exits and the gutters because of health, reasons. But I think another thing that, we need to kind of get out of our heads is that the best way to plan an area is by these really strict straight lines, right? So like I've been working in Dubai for like almost 2 years now, and the architecture of the Middle East is a lot like that of northern Nigeria. So the way, there's not like lots of sharp edges. The way buildings grow organically, like you build your house and then your neighbor's house, basically you could share a wall with your neighbor. And there's a reason that happens. It's because the temperature is really hot. People try to keep their corridors and alleyways very narrow so that it's shaded. So that kind of informality is not familiar with the global north. And so we like to implement their strategies because there's straight lines and there's huge wide roads, but it's not really about that. It's about what works for us. So somewhere in northern Nigeria, I wouldn't say that the narrow alleyways are necessarily a problem.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem.
That's a problem.
I think it's how they go about doing it. Again, you have a house that there's no sewage, and even when you talk about like let's say more developed countries, you can share wall with your neighbor and stuff like that, but they're still designed in such a way that in the case of an emergency or like fire hazard, you will still be able to find a way around. But the way Nigerians design their houses, like someone's house, like if you go to Kano, you have a 20-bedroom apartment in a very small plot of land. And then this is your room, this is your fence. Very easy. If there's a fire hazard, God forbid, the fire can easily go into your neighbor's house. Where do you escape from?
Most of these things, they're not things that, it's not like we don't know. The building codes are there. I mean, there are literally codes that tell you can't have more than 13 steps without a landing, and every how many meters you need to have a fire escape. But then it's regulation. Might know. We know, but then
the everyday average Nigerian might not know, because unless if you're
the average Nigerian is not supposed to be. There's a design process, and there's approvals to get stuff built. So ideally, the process is supposed to work in our favor, but I know our problem.
Because now, if I want to build a house and I just made money overnight, and I want to build a house, and I meet you and I'm like, oh, I know Safiya is an architect. I'll just be like, okay, Safiya, I want you to design a house for me, and then you have regulations you have to follow, and then I'll be like, I don't like how this looks, and then you're trying to explain to me, but I'll just be like, see, I have money. Just do it the way I want you to do it, and that is what happens. That is unfortunately what happens. So,
and that's one of the things that we really need to get.
So sensitization comes into the equation now.
Okay, so the way that it's happened, that I know that it's happened in other places, is that until these things go wrong in a really bad way, nobody will investigate. So I always see that. I see, for instance, market fires in Kano. They keep happening, and they keep happening in Kano. But yet nobody is asking why this is constantly happening in the same, axis of the same city. Like, what is it about them that, why it always happens to them? And so, until it gets to a point where people are willing to like strip back and look at what we are doing wrong, and then have stricter implementations, nobody's going to bear the brunt of doing that kind of work.
I think that this is my opinion. It's not fact, but I think, like with everything in Nigeria, underdevelopment and lots of corruption affects all these things, because regardless of how much we try to change these things, people always kind of find back doors. So unless if you improve the livelihood of people and sensitize them in terms of functionality of things, their function in society, the functions of other things in society. So for example, like let's talk about this Kaduna Abuja train. People don't have a job. People don't have money. There's issue of safety and security. So even though you've provided this train, it is being misused because of the effects of some other things that are not functioning properly. So now if we try to fix this houses and stuff like that, if people, like, are people still going to be able to afford affordable housing, and are people not going to like turn it into something else? For example, affordable housing, right? someone who is rich would go and buy like maybe 4 or 5 houses, or rent 4 or 5 houses, turn it into his office, or do something that he is not supposed to do.
Well, that's where regulation comes in, and hopefully whoever is selling will.
But that's what we just talked about. People not obeying regulations.
People not being.
Because people always find, because this thing happens with a lot of different things. It happens with jobs. It happens with scholarships and stuff like that, where people that the things are meant for, they don't have access to it, and then the people that are supposed to have access to it are not, like, they don't have access to it.
They don't have access to it.
So even if we do like affordable housing and we structure it properly, are the people who are the most affected, who the thing is meant for, will they be able to?
That's where the public sector comes in.
So
to make sure that those are the people that are actually getting the housing. And it's okay. Affordable housing or social housing is not, you can't just come and buy it. It's not something that anyone can just come and buy. Yeah. I mean, ideally there's a procedure to go about it. You need to prove that you're within a certain income bracket. You need to bring all those documents, and so that hopefully should prevent all of that from happening. Because the thing about housing is that people always get pushed out. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest grievances.
Yeah.
People always get pushed out. And so that's where the public sector comes in to implement and to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So, if you were to take any Nigerian state and like start from scratch and build, maybe let's even
start from scratch?
No, let's.
We're talking hypothetical, like
yes.
Wiping out?
No, we're not wiping anyone out. Yeah, we're just starting from scratch. Like, even if it's just a single community, what state would you pick? Why? And also, what would you do in terms of like urbanization? Urban building, all these things.
What state would I pick?
Yeah.
I love Lagos, but then I also know my limits, and Lagos is too much of a challenge. But I think I would go to Niger State. Niger State.
Where in Niger? Mina,
maybe.
Okay.
Because Niger State is so well positioned in regards to its proximity to the capital, and I think that Niger State could act as sort of a secondary place where things that are not being done in the capital can be done. Yeah. So once you get in public transport, like a really good rail system that will get you from Mina to Abuja in what? For like, let's be crazy and say 30 minutes, right? Something like that. It's doable. Once you get that, I think Mina could be a very good support system for Abuja. So it could be like a New York, New Jersey type of arrangement.
San Francisco,
exactly.
all those
LA kind of arrangement, and it would take the pressure off Abuja to be everything.
Yeah. Because
Abuja is so central that sometimes it's difficult for, I think, Abuja to carry the weight of being everything.
Yeah.
So it would be a really good place. Plus, Niger State has amazing landscapes. There's just like the wildlife too is
and
really
good resources
good.
as well.
Amazing resources. So there's a lot of things that can be done in terms of development there. Yeah.
That's not bad. In this article that you wrote, like, spoke about like the hawkers and the suya sellers, shoe shiners and stuff like that. Planning for informality.
Okay.
Talk about that.
So one of the things that irritates me the most whenever I see like visualizations of what people think, a certain development is going to look like.
The culture.
They just completely, it's like they absolutely just delete the culture, and they pretend like, the woman who is roasting corn by the side of the street will not be there in their imagination of what it's like. Yeah. And I think that's where we really go wrong, because we're planning with the idea that we're just going to control delete on all those things that we don't like to see. But those things are necessary.
And where will you go to if
you need to buy corn and you're just driving on the road? Like, these hawkers are going to be there. The thing is, nothing drastic has changed in our economy that we're going to say that, somebody's not going to be walking around selling recharge cards, selling this, selling drinks, selling that. So in the meantime, why don't we plan for those people? Why don't we, even our markets are not planned properly, why don't we accommodate those informal sectors?
Yeah.
And also, like, it would be more useful for us to take the things that work from the global north. So there's like 4 very big planning principles, right? So that's basically what a lot of African cities that are planned have been planned around. So, but they don't work for us. They've worked there, but they don't work for us. So what would be more useful would be just to take the things, the elements that work for us, and then redesign everything else and basically see what is best for us.
Yeah. So you still want us keep the Mesuya, keep the Masara.
They're not going anywhere. Because what happens when you don't accommodate for them is that they will accommodate themselves.
Yeah.
And it'll turn into a situation where it almost looks like the city is trying to rebel against these very strict lines that you've put it in.
Yeah.
So
I know, like, I think it was on the 18 World Cup or stuff like that was done in Nigeria, something like that. And all the Almajere were told to
leave. To just not be present.
So you want to create this very superficial approach that we have to solutions. Like there's a reason why we have Almajere, and just because foreigners are coming in, you now want the Almajere to magically disappear, and when they go, you can come back.
Yeah, and one of the biggest criticisms, obviously, from developers is, they say, well, we're not going to accommodate this because it's almost like you're encouraging them.
Yeah.
It's almost like, okay, so for example, just like you have a homeless person, you're not going to allow them to sleep out on the street because you're encouraging them. You're not going to make it more comfortable for them to be there because they assume that these people are not even supposed to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
But then it always goes back to, by what standards are these people not supposed to be here?
How did they get there?
How do they get?
The question should be how did they get there? How can we prevent more people from getting there? On some of the conversations that has been had now, there's potential that Nigeria would grow.
Yeah.
Maybe not in our lifetime, but definitely.
Maybe not.
Yeah, but definitely I think Nigeria has potential. It just all depends on what we're willing to do now.
Yeah.
So because that like very little hope is the only thing I have.
There's hope. I'm very optimistic, especially when it comes to planning, because there's already a lot of places in the global south that are getting it right. South Africa is getting it right. Yeah. Kigali is getting it right. There's communities in India that are doing it on a very small scale, and they have very similar cultures as ours. And so it becomes easy to look at that and say, okay, this worked for them. They have similar culture. The economy is somewhat, similar, and then we can now scale it up and see if it works for us.
I think I read some very briefly about something about Lagos not being around in the next couple like 50 or 60 years.
Lagos will be there forever. Lagos will always be there. I just don't see how that would be possible. But
maybe
Lagos
parts of it
is very problematic. Maybe not the Lagos as we know it. I think the biggest issue with Lagos is the urbanization. It's just way too populated. The city was never designed to take that many people, and people keep coming in. More and more and more people keep coming in. And as much as they're not building fast enough to house those people. And the slum population is steadily increasing. It's a problem.
Yeah. So now that you've spoken about your all the parts that you want to talk about.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you want to add?
Is there anything else I want to add? Okay, so something that I've been thinking about lately, and I'm writing about this too right now, is citizens' participation in urbanization. Or generally in the area that involves the urban planning of their communities.
Yeah.
So you cannot plan without citizens' opinions, because at the end of the day, the users or the inhabitants of these communities can either break or make it, because they are the ones that will dictate if it works or not, based on the way they live their lives. So I think it's very important for us to hold the people who are in charge of regulating the way our cities grow. We need to hold them accountable, because it's easy for you to drive down and complain about traffic, complain about this shop that just opened down your street and is, you know, giving you so much grief, or, you know, just to complain. It's easy, but then you basically have to take it up with someone eventually.
How do you channel that? Because if there's one thing that I know in these places that we can complain for Africa, but when it's time for action,
no one does it.
Like we hardly channel our complaints to the right place or the right person.
There are people that you can channel your complaints to, and what I found that works is that the larger your group, so if you can get as many people as possible and you complain in a large group, they will listen. I've done that in Guarimpa before. I don't want to go into details, but I've done that in Guarimpa before, because Guarimpa is one of those places that has become completely disorganized now. And so,
and your roads are very bad.
And our roads are bad. And so when you see something, it's not difficult for you to take it up and say, you know, somebody just opened a hotel right next to me. Is this building supposed to be here? Like, do they have the license to be here? What's going on? And especially when these things affect the way you live. Yeah. Like, they affect you on a daily basis. Because you have paid for your house and you're living peacefully. And someone comes in, and then all of a sudden you can't even get out your front door because there's too much traffic.
Like,
so
I have public areas and quite like you know how outside, like I know, like if you want to build a club, I don't know about churches outside or mosques. I know like the regulations. It has to be soundproof. Whatever noise you're generating inside doesn't go out and disturb people, especially if it's around a residential area. But you have churches, mosques, clubs and stuff like that in residential areas, and they could care less about.
They don't follow codes, they don't follow regulations. So I've worked on several projects that are like restaurants or lounges that make a lot of noise. So usually the municipality is supposed to give you a code and say, well, you have to be this level of soundproof, and they'll come in and test everything and make sure that you're not infringing on someone else's space.
We don't have all of that yet. I know of only one church actually that seems to be soundproof. Like throughout like churches and mosques and everything in Nigeria, I've only come across one
that is soundproof.
That's it's quite big. Like obviously I don't want to mention any names and stuff like that, but like they have a big following and stuff like that. And they usually have all these big events and stuff, but the sound never goes out. So that is good. At least you can give them that. But outside of that particular church, I have not come across any other church or mosque that is that. And a lot of them are in residential areas. So,
I mean, I've been to places where people are very protective of their space, where to the point where it doesn't even go beyond like, okay, this is a plot line and you can't cross, but it's about little things like sound. Like there's a thing as sound rights. There's air rights. There's rights to a view. So if in certain cities that I've done projects in, if you live in a certain apartment, someone else can't come and build above that and block your view because you own that space, you own the view too. And so nobody is allowed to come in and encroach on that and take the quality of your.
I remember my first year in university, like like student halls. Sometimes when students like drink a lot, they drink and then they like arrange their beer bottles in their windows, and someone from the opposite end of the street complained that it is like somehow it's aesthetically not pleasing for people to see bottle, and they had to take it down. So that is deep, but basically from our conversation we have a long way to go in Nigeria, but hopefully
it's
we'll
doable.
Get there.
It's possible. We just have a while to go.
Alright, I think we've pretty much covered everything we need to cover for today, and thank you very much for your time, and we will see you again. Alright.